You're sitting in a quiet room. No music, no notifications, no voices, just you and the silence. And within about 90 seconds, something in your chest starts to tighten. You reach for your phone, not because you need it, just because the quiet has become unbearable. You probably think this is a personal quirk. Maybe you tell yourself you're just someone who needs background noise to focus, or that you get bored easily. But the truth runs much deeper than personality. For nearly the entire history of our species, true silence almost never existed. And your brain, the one you're using right now, was never built to tolerate it. Think about what silence actually means to a human nervous system that evolved across hundreds of thousands of years on the African savanna, in dense forests, along rivers and coastlines. In those environments, silence was never neutral. Silence meant something had changed. Birds stop singing when a predator approaches. Insects go quiet when something large moves through the grass. For your ancestors, a sudden absence of ambient sound wasn't peaceful. It was a warning. Evolutionary biologists have long studied what's called the acoustic landscape of natural environments, and one consistent finding keeps surfacing. A healthy ecosystem is almost never silent. It hums, chirps, rustles, and calls constantly. This background noise is so reliable that many species, humans included, evolved to treat its sudden disappearance as one of the most important danger signals available. When a forest goes quiet, something is wrong. That reflex didn't disappear just because you now live in an apartment instead of a floodplain. This is where your discomfort in a silent room starts to make a strange kind of sense. Your nervous system isn't malfunctioning when quiet feels tense. It's running an ancient threat detection system that has nothing to update it. There's no predator in your bedroom, but the part of your brain responsible for scanning for danger doesn't know that. It only knows that the expected baseline hum of the environment has vanished, and historically, that absence meant pay attention now. Neuroscientists and psychiatrist researchers studying the brain's response to silence have found something counterintuitive. Silence doesn't calm the brain down. In several studies using functional imaging, sudden silence after a period of noise actually produces a brief spike in activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, before it eventually settles. Your brain treats a shift into silence as an event worth reacting to, not simply an absence of stimulation. Now here's the part that should really surprise you. True, complete silence, the kind found in an anechoic chamber, a room engineered to absorb virtually all sound, is reported by nearly everyone who experiences it as deeply disturbing within minutes. People describe hearing their own heartbeat, their blood moving, their joints creaking, and many report the experience as unsettling rather than relaxing, some even needing to sit down or leave the room early. If humans had evolved for silence, this should feel like the ultimate reward. Instead, it feels like sensory deprivation because, in a sense, that's exactly what it is. Contrast that with what your ancestors' actual environment sounded like almost all day, every day for their entire lives. Wind moving through leaves. Insects at every hour. Distant animal calls. The low murmur of other people nearby, since humans have almost always lived in close physical proximity to their group. Anthropologists studying contemporary hunter-gatherer societies have noted that genuine solitude and genuine silence are exceedingly rare experiences in these communities. People eat together, sleep in close quarters, work side by side, and are almost never truly alone or truly without ambient sound. Silence, real silence, was so rare across human history that your brain simply never developed a resting state built around it. This reframes something you've probably felt your whole life without naming it. That vague restlessness when a room goes too quiet. That urge to turn on a podcast, put on music, or call someone, not because you're bored, but because something feels subtly off. You're not weak-willed or addicted to stimulation. You're a social, group-oriented animal encountering an environmental condition, true isolated quiet, that would have been almost unheard of for the 300,000 years your species has existed, and only became common in roughly the last century, as private bedrooms, personal offices, and solitary living became widely available. Historian and sociologist research on the rise of private space has traced how dramatically human living arrangements changed with industrialization and modern housing. For most of history, multiple generations of a family, sometimes along with animals, slept in a single room. Villages functioned as constant low-level acoustic environments, with conversation, work sounds, and animal noise blending together throughout the day. The idea of a person spending hours alone in total quiet, which is now completely normal for millions of people working from home or living independently, would have been almost unimaginable for nearly all of human history. Not because people lacked the opportunity, but because human social structure itself made it nearly impossible. So when you feel that specific, hard-to-name discomfort in silence, you're not experiencing a flaw. You're experiencing a mismatch between an ancient social nervous system and an environment engineered, quite recently and quite deliberately, for individual privacy. Apartments with soundproofing, noise-canceling headphones, single-occupancy offices. Every one of these represents a triumph of modern design and a small betrayal of what your body expects the world to sound like. There's a reason this feeling intensifies specifically at night, or when you're alone for extended stretches. Darkness has always compounded the ancestral danger response. Since most predators historically hunted using senses other than sight, meaning early humans relied even more heavily on sound to detect nearby threats after dusk. Combine nighttime, which already heightens vigilance, with silence, which removes the ambient acoustic reassurance that other creatures and group members are present and unbothered, and you get a nervous system working overtime for no reason your conscious mind can identify. You just feel like something is wrong, because ancestrally, in that exact combination of conditions, something usually was. This also explains why certain sounds specifically ease this tension more than others. Research on stress and ambient sound has repeatedly found that human voices, even at low volume, and even when you're not actively listening to the content, tend to reduce feelings of unease faster than most other sound categories. This tracks perfectly with an evolutionary framework. The sound of other humans nearby, talking, moving, existing, was historically one of the most reliable signals that your immediate environment was safe. Podcasts and background chatter aren't just distraction. For a huge portion of your nervous system's operating logic, they're a stand-in for the presence of your group. This is also likely why so many people report a specific kind of loneliness attached to silence that isn't attached to being physically alone doing something engaging. Sitting quietly by yourself reading an engrossing book rarely produces the same restlessness as sitting in a silent room with nothing to do. The difference isn't really about mental stimulation. It's about whether your brain registers your surroundings as socially and acoustically safe. A book gives your mind something to attend to. An empty silent room gives your ancient alarm system nothing to work with except its own hypervigilance. None of this means silence is dangerous or something to be feared today. Meditation research and clinical studies on quiet environments consistently show real benefits for stress reduction. When silence is approached gradually and with intention rather than encountered suddenly and involuntarily. The difference matters enormously. A meditation practitioner choosing stillness, expecting it, framing it as safe, experiences something very different physiologically than someone abruptly isolated in a soundless room with no context and no sense of control over the situation. Your ancient alarm system responds to unexpected, uncontrolled silence very differently than it responds to silence you've deliberately chosen and prepared yourself for. This distinction might be the single most useful thing your ancestors could hand you if they somehow understood your modern life. It was never really silence itself that threatened them. It was unexpected, unexplained silence, arriving without warning in a world that was supposed to hum constantly with the presence of other living things. Chosen quiet, in a familiar space, entered deliberately, has never carried the same ancestral alarm. Which means the next time a quiet room makes you reach for your phone, you're not failing at stillness. You're listening to hundreds of thousands of years of instinct, still faithfully doing its job in a world that changed far faster than your nervous system ever could. Maybe the goal was never to force yourself to sit in total silence and simply endure the discomfort until it disappeared. Maybe the goal is to understand what that discomfort is actually asking for. Not distraction, not more noise for its own sake. Just the quiet reassurance, however you choose to provide it, that you're not as alone in this moment as the silence is telling you that you are. There's a curious modern experiment that puts all of this into sharp focus. A few years ago, researchers gave participants a choice between sitting quietly with their own thoughts for 15 minutes or receiving a mild electric shock if they got bored enough to press a button. A striking number of people, especially men in the study, chose to shock themselves rather than simply sit in silence with nothing to occupy their minds. At first glance, this looks like evidence that people are simply bad at being alone with their thoughts. But look at it through an ancestral lens, and something else comes into focus. Unstructured silence, with no task, no social contact, and no sensory input to monitor, put these participants in a state their nervous systems are not well equipped to interpret as safe. Discomfort, in that context, isn't a character flaw. It's the alarm system doing exactly what it evolved to do when the environment stops giving it anything to work with. This same dynamic plays out in something far more common than a laboratory experiment. Consider the almost universal habit of turning on a television or a podcast the moment you walk into an empty house. Most people describe this as wanting company or filling the silence, or simply liking background noise. But notice how specific the craving is. It's rarely for pure tones or abstract sound. It's almost always for voices. Chatter, dialogue, something that sounds, even faintly, like other people existing nearby. This lines up precisely with what anthropologists have documented about ancestral group life, where the low continuous murmur of other humans was as constant and unremarkable as the sound of wind. Its presence meant safety. Its absence meant something had gone wrong, or that you had become separated from your group in a way that historically increased your vulnerability considerably. It's worth pausing on just how socially embedded human life was for nearly the whole of our history. Solitary confinement is recognized today across multiple bodies of research on incarceration and mental health as one of the most psychologically damaging conditions a person can be subjected to, even when physical needs like food, warmth, and safety are otherwise met. That severity only makes sense if you consider what solitude actually represented for nearly the entire span of human evolution. Separation from the group didn't just mean loneliness in an emotional sense. It meant a person had lost access to shared vigilance, shared food gathering, shared defense against predators and rival groups, and shared body heat during cold nights. Extended solitude was, in the most literal evolutionary sense, dangerous. Your brain's aversion to prolonged silence and isolation isn't some minor quirk layered on top of your personality. It's a survival mechanism operating exactly as intended, just in a world that no longer matches the conditions it was built to interpret. This also helps explain something that might seem contradictory at first. Many people report that a completely silent, completely empty house feels far more unsettling than the exact same silence experienced while camping in a genuinely wild, remote forest. Shouldn't the forest, full of unfamiliar animals and unpredictable terrain, feel more dangerous than your own living room? Researchers studying perceived safety in natural versus artificial environments suggest the difference lies in what the silence is being compared against. A quiet forest is still acoustically alive. Wind, insects, distant birds, the occasional rustle of leaves, all continue humming along in the background, providing exactly the kind of ambient reassurance your nervous system is built to expect. An empty modern house, by contrast, is often acoustically dead. Soundproofed walls, sealed windows, and carpeted floors were specifically engineered to eliminate ambient noise, inadvertently creating an environment far more acoustically alien to your evolutionary history than an actual forest at night. Understanding this doesn't mean you need to abandon quiet rooms or soundproof apartments. It simply means the discomfort you feel isn't a personal failing to be white-knuckled through. When silence starts to feel oppressive, reaching for a podcast, a call with a friend, or even just the hum of a fan isn't avoidance. In many cases, it's your nervous system correctly identifying what it needs in order to register the environment as safe and finding a reasonable, modern substitute for what your ancestors would have simply gotten by existing near other people all day. If you do want to build a genuine tolerance for stillness, the research on meditation and gradual exposure suggests the key isn't forcing yourself into sudden, prolonged silence and pushing through the discomfort by sheer will. It's building up slowly in familiar, controlled settings, so your nervous system has time to relearn gradually that this particular silence doesn't carry the ancestral meaning it once reliably did. Start with a few minutes. Choose a space you already associate with safety. Let your body catch up to what your mind already knows intellectually, that no predator is waiting in the quiet of your bedroom. Maybe the real lesson your ancestors would want you to take from all this isn't that silence is something to fear, but that your discomfort with it was never irrational to begin with. It was, for most of human history, remarkably accurate. The silence used to mean something had changed. Today, it usually doesn't. But teaching an ancient alarm system that takes time, patience, and the occasional reminder that you are, in fact, still surrounded by people, even if you can't currently hear them.